to Abuja, the place that unites Nigeria.
Efforts to track criminal activities intensify as 2019 Interpol Week continues in Abuja.
A string of lectures are designed to give them insight into the capabilities and the opportunities that Interpol could offer.
Nigeria spearheads adoption of common operational strategies as African Sub-Regional Maritime Summit holds in Abuja.
Tough time awaits producers and marketers of fake and substandard seeds as National Agricultural Seeds Council of Nigeria begins sensitization.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we focus on the proposed review of the revenue allocation formula.
You know, Kingsley, the topic for today's discussion, review of revenue sharing formula, is apt. As government over the years, there has been agitation for a review of the revenue sharing formula in the country in favor of the states and local government councils.
No doubt about that. I mean, you've had a number of state governors clamor for a review of the current formula. And this, of course, has become more pronounced in recent years.
Yes, exactly. Right. And under the current revenue sharing formula, the federal government gets the lion's share of 52.68%. The 36 states, 26.72%, while the remaining 20.6% goes to the 774 local government councils.
That's right. Now, but with the recent inauguration of the new chairman and commissioners of the Revenue, Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission by President Muhammadu Buhari, the need for a review of the sharing formula has been rekindled.
And however, some observers are of the view that although states are right to call for review of the sharing formula, but argued that it is not the solution to their quest for increased revenue.
But why are states and local governments so keen, as it were, on a review of the existing revenue allocation formula? And is it really easy to alter the current arrangements, and what are the criteria for such review? And how long might it take to formalize a review of the existing revenue allocation formula? And ultimately, how will the review of the existing formula help to shore up the revenue base of the subnational entities? Yes, on that note, of course, we'd like to welcome you to today's edition of Good Morning Nigeria. We are reaching you, as always, live on a network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. My name is Kingsley Osadolo.
And I am Juma Yusuf. As usual, we have our complimentary part of the program, you know, newspaper review, business, sports, and others. We thank you so much for joining us on Good Morning Nigeria today. But right now, we'll begin the news segment with Ifeoma Ojinta. Hello, Ifeoma.
Hello, Jumai and Kingsley. Good morning, and here is the morning news. Nigeria is deploying the expertise and capacity of the Interpol to tackle challenges of insecurity, banking on the global spread of the police organization in 194 countries to track the activities of the criminals across borders and bring them to face the law. To this end, the Inspector General of Police, Mohammed Adamu, has initiated the 2019 International Police Organization Interpol Week to bring to the public the range of Interpol tools for proper collaboration.
A string of lectures are designed to give them insight into the capabilities and the opportunities that Interpol could offer in the aid of the attainment of our security management mandate.
We shall also work with other agencies and the international partners to ensure that the Nigeria police becomes a model in law enforcement in our region.
In the meantime, the Minister of Police Affairs, Mohammed Megari Dingyadi, has assured Nigerians of rapid improvements on the internal security architecture as the ministry is collaborating with the Interior Ministry and other relevant agencies to ensure general overhaul of the security landscape. The minister stated this at a meeting in Abuja, where he unveiled the ministry's roadmap.
These agencies must make the people, first of all, know that committing a crime will not be easy. And that if ultimately crimes that we don't want to happen is committed, they must know that they cannot escape.
The decision of Mr. President to establish this ministry is not unconnected with his commitment on the need to have better security for this country.
Nigeria is spearheading adoption of common political, diplomatic, and operational strategies for African countries to positively impact on the economy of the sub-region. Minister of Transportation Rotimi Amechi at the opening of West and Central Africa Sub-Region Maritime Summit in Abuja feels that is the way to go.
In 2018, Nigerian Shippers Council harmonized the tariff nomenclature for local shipping charges in Nigeria, established a sustainable framework for future review of tariffs, and established standards of service for all container terminals in Nigeria.
The federal government says it will not hesitate to delist and prosecute any person or company found guilty of production and marketing of fake and substandard seeds to farmers. To this end, the National Agricultural Seeds Council of Nigeria has commenced sensitization of farmers and seeds merchants on relevant laws guiding seeds business in Nigeria.
We are out that there is, in Nigeria's seed market, you should not see bad and adulterated seed again. So that farmers that go to the market to buy seed is sure that is obtaining quality seed for planting on his field.
Sensitization exercise that is taking place now is a welcome development both to Nigeria, not only Nigeria, but West Africa.
With less than 48 hours to the APC party primaries for Kogi and Bayelsa states, 1 week to the PDP primaries and 81 days to the main elections, INEC has commenced distribution of non-sensitive materials to the two states. The INEC National Commissioner for Information and Voter Education, Festus Okoye, gives updates on their preparations.
Before the end of this week, all the non-sensitive materials for the conduct of elections in Kogi and Bayelsa states will be in those states. And in relation to the sensitive materials, we are also working on the sensitive materials. And we are going to make sure that all the sensitive materials arrive all these days on time.
Minister of Women Affairs, Mrs. Pauline Tallinn, has reiterated federal government's determination to improve the lots of women in politics through the establishment of young women mentoring cells in the 6 geopolitical zones. She said this when she received a delegation of young women politicians in Abuja. Safeguarding the law of free movement for the entire African countries is critical towards addressing insurgency and other security threats, bedeviling socio-economic activities on the continent. This was the position of the Nigerian legislature at the 2019 statutory meeting of the Pan-African Parliament in South Africa.
I want to believe these are the main causes, but as legislators, I believe when we carry out our oversight functions very well in our various states and country,
we'll be able to reduce and mitigate some of these problems.
The process of reuniting 133 voluntary repatriated refugees with their families has commenced in Yola. Correspondent reports that the Duwari Transit Center is a beehive of activities as counseling of the returnees is underway.
Now we are feeling better. Everything we have it. We have security. The HCR of Nigeria, they help us with many things. We have room to sleep. Our children, all of them, they are playing.
They've all been identified. The only thing is maybe there's one family, like for instance, a woman and some children, that is an indigene of Madagali, but she prefers to stay in Maiha. There are some few cases like this, but they've all been identified.
And that's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Kinsley and Jumai after this break.
Preparing for that big day can be somewhat stressful. Which can lead to headaches and pain. So treat headaches and pain fast with Nurofen Express. Nurofen Express liquid capsules, when taken, starts to dissolve in 1 minute, then goes to the source of pain fast, providing quick and effective relief. Nurofen Express works at the source of pain fast.
Back then, when our baby gets a fever and starts running a temperature, our whole world turns upside down. Many methods we tried didn't work. We tried Nurofen for children. That's when we found relief. Nurofen starts to work in just 15 minutes and provides up to 8 hours of pain and fever relief. Nurofen for children. For fast and effective relief you can trust.
Relieve tooth sensitivity with Sensodyne Daily Care 40 milliliters for just 350 naira only.
Sensitivity is a short, sharp pain that people experience when they have something hot or cold getting to the nerve of the tooth. Dentists recommend Sensodyne. It's able to calm the nerve of the tooth.
This is Good Morning Nigeria, and we are live in Abuja. Federal government to start implementation of new minimum wage with effect from August salary. Chimobi Walter in Nigeria is standing by with details on business news.
The Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, while clearing the air on the minimum wage controversy, said the implementation of the new minimum wage takes effect with the August salary for federal civil servants whose salary was below the new minimum wage. She further noted that this is to give way for continued negotiations between Labour and the federal government and consequential adjustments for other cadre of the civil servants.
So we are implementing the minimum wage at the federal level in August period. We are also discussing with Labour on the consequential adjustment, that is the increase that needs to be applied for the rest of the levels that are above the minimum wage. This negotiation is a tripartite negotiation with Labour, the federal and the state and the federal government.
The ongoing negotiations, she said, does not cover state civil servants, as the same negotiations are expected to take place at the state level between the state governments and their respective labor unions. Meanwhile, with over 47 million registered micro, small and medium enterprises in Nigeria, relevant agencies are harmonizing standards to ensure that Nigerian market is not proliferated with substandard goods from importing countries due to Nigeria becoming a signatory to the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. The harmonization, which is expected to create a level playing ground for small players in the market and avoid issues of dumping, will strengthen Nigeria's manufacturing sector.
Our key role is to make sure that the standards of Africa are common. And in most of the cases, the Nigerian standard is used as the best document, giving us an advantage. So the more we get involved in it, the better for us. For the existing products that we might say, well, there are no standard here and there, we have envisaged the issue of substandard products already. So apart from our Standards Organization Conformity Assessment Program, SONCAP, and then the Mandatory Conformity Assessment Program, MANCAP. We're harmonizing those two into something new, which we call product authentication.
With Business News, I'm Chimobi Walter Naji.
Thank you very much, Chimobi Walter Naji, for that business package. Up next for us on the program is a review of today's newspapers.
Our newspaper reviewer, Bayo Atiobi, is in the studio. Good morning, Bayo.
Good morning, Juma. Good morning, Kingsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, Bayo, good to see you.
Thank you.
Yes, good to see you. We begin today with the Daily Trust newspaper. Just below the masthead, minimum wage. NLC accuses FG of deliberate delay. You find that on page 3. And APC screens out 12 Kogi governorship aspirants. That's on page 13. SMEs kick as FIRS plans 5% VAT on online transactions. And that's on page 17. And then the bold headlines there, controversy over armored vehicles seized in Adamawa. You find out it continues on page 5. And the picture story there, Japanese wearing Nigerian attire welcomed President Buhari on arrival at Yokohama in Japan yesterday ahead of the 7th Tokyo International Conference on African Development. And at the bottom of the Daily Trust newspaper, gunmen kill 2 police, kidnap medical director. Find that on page 34. Poverty, explosive demographic growth in Nigeria, worrisome. That's coming from the United Nations. You find out on page 6. And NYC arrests 10 fake core members. That's on page 10.
All right, next paper for us is the blueprint. Blueprint immediately below the nameplate says court upholds Kogi APC's choice for indirect primaries with 2 riders, party rakes in 363 million naira, Claire's Bello and 3 others. Amechi and Abe disagree over party congress venue, that's in Rivers. And the story that Jumai just read a while ago, NYC arrests 10 fake corps members. That's page 5 in greater detail. But the lead story for Blueprint says, with a kicker, presidency, why Buhari can't save suspected fraudsters in the U.S. Insists justice must take its course and mauls executive order to check reoccurrence. And then right at the foot of the front page, let's take a few of the headlines there. Says, I'll mark 100 days with Ruga settlement. That's according to the Zamfara governor. That's page 8. Edo reintegrates 4,943 Libya returnees in 2 years. That's page 13. And Kano engages 3,000 volunteer teachers on free education. Bayo.
Thank you, Kingsley. Let's start with President Muhammadu Buhari in Yokohama. He arrived in Yokohama for the Tokyo International Conference on African Development. Teacher started in 1993 and is hosting its 7th edition. Nigeria's delegation were received in Yokohama. Meanwhile, TICAD has been a source of encouragement for African development. A special advisor to the president on publicity, Femi Adesina, indicated that about 30 billion was given to Africa between the 6th edition and now, and another tranche of 200 billion as well as 20 billion and 500 billion were ceded to Africa. TICA is open for all Africans who want to take advantage of the development initiative by Japan. The other story that has been trending in the public media is what has been described as strange military vehicles that were discovered in Adamawa State. The 6 military hardware have been identified as mine-resistant, ambush-protected MRAP vehicles. They were actually imported through Cameroon, and they were meant for Niger Republic. However, there were no documentation, and so when they were arriving towards Nigeria's border, the vigilance of the Department of State Services spotted it, and in conjunction with the army, they were impounded and they are with the customs. However, indications are that they are part of the military hardware donated by the United States to the Nigerian government as part of its initiative to fight terrorism. It is meant to go to the United States military base in somewhere in Nigeria. So those doubts about that has been apparently cleared. It's left for the custom and the military authorities to sort those things out.
Bayo, thank you. I was just wondering, I mean, when that story first broke, with regard to the so-called strange military vehicles that were discovered, if they are mine-resistant vehicles, they cannot be strange in the first instance. And you will find that almost ultimately there's no story there.
Yes.
There's no story. I mean, so why did we have the storm in the teacup over those vehicles? Assuming the vehicles were imported, and obviously they were, and the vehicles were being transported by trucks, there are drivers of those trucks. And those drivers would have documents. If they don't have documents, then you keep them aside until they're able to explain the source of the vehicles and where they are going to. So why was there the rush, as it were, to the media to say, oh, we have arrested or apprehended or otherwise restrained drivers who were using so-called strange vehicles?
In fact,
it's a waste of everybody's time.
When I first heard the story, you will recall that the penultimate week, such mine-resistant vehicle manufactured by our Nigerian armed forces had been launched.
Absolutely.
So I thought those were the ones that people saw and they found to be strange, only to find that this is part of the contribution towards war against insurgency. However, there is a vacuum. The required information through Nigeria that such equipment was passing through was apparently not communicated. So that's the communication gap. But I agree with you that people made a mountain out of a molehill.
Absolutely. Juma, let's continue with the stories.
And we continue now with the Daily Sun newspaper, just by the side of the masthead. Interpol meets in Abuja over terrorism and kidnapping, with a rider, judge missing, feared kidnapped. You find that on page 4 and 5. And the headlines there, as killings, kidnappings continue, NLC talks tough, plans mass protest. You find that on page 6, with rider, demands implementation of new minimum wage. And then the picture story there, in Yokohama, President Muhammadu Buhari with Nigerian ambassador to Japan, Mohammed Ganayisa, left. Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Geoffrey Oyema, is on second right, and Governor Samuel Otom of Benue State in Japan, where they are attending the 7th Tokyo International Conference on African Development. And beside the picture story, no IPOP protest against Buhari in Japan. That's coming from the presidency. You find that on page 10. 3 die, 90 missing in Cameroon-bound Nigerian ferry mishap. Quite a sad story there, and you find that on page 4. And 4 fared killed, 12 women missing after Boko Haram attack in Borno. And below the picture message there, CBN raises alert on fraudulent loan schemes. You find that on page 2. Kinsley?
That's right. Still on the loan issue, there's a list story in the old Daily Times newspaper, which we have with us this morning. The list story says loan defaulters to forfeit deposits in other banks. And this is attributed to the Bankers Committee. Details on page 3. With 2 riders, new directive will boost consumer credit and others to honest loaners. The CBN, that should be honest borrowers, I believe. The CBN has been quoted with that one. Implementation of initiative may hike industry's credit growth to 1 trillion naira. Now, above that, you have 2 other headlines. Just one of them is beside the nameplate. We can't see that immediately on the screen, but let's just go there. NLC to federal government and states. Implement new minimum wage now. It says federal government can't use protracted negotiations with workers as excuse to delay payment, and frowns at increase in sponsored campaigns for hike in price of PMS and others. PMS stands for petrol. That's Premium Auto Spirit. Obasanjo Library. Stop misleading the public. Article tells the FCC. That's on page 6. And then right at the foot of the front page of the Daily Times, FIRS to impose VAT on online transaction from January 2020. And court summons Malami and EFCC over Yari's properties. Yari is the former governor of Zamfara. And Burete assures oil companies of secure environment in Niger Delta. That's page 4. Bayo.
Yes, let's start with the human interest story. A federal high court judge, Justice Idrissa Saleh, has been declared missing. The family reported to the police that the judge was admitted at a hospital in the Central Business District. The judge was said to have discharged himself from the hospital. He boarded a taxi and never arrived home, and nobody knows his whereabouts. The police is currently treating it as a case of a missing person. However, they also another ongoing.
Bayo, could you just go over that again for the interests of of
Justice,
the public, just in case
Justice Idrissa Saleh has been declared missing. He was admitted in the hospital in the Central Business District. The doctors say he discharged himself, which means he left the hospital against doctors' advice. He was said to have boarded a taxi, and since then he has not returned home. His family reported to the police, and police are treating it as a missing person case.
What I can't seem to understand is he was admitted in the hospital. Was there nobody, family members around the area?
Not even family members. I thought judges had orderlies.
Yes.
That stay with them, that accompany them.
Their drivers too are there. So what happened in this story?
I think a lot of questions would need to be asked.
Yes, and where the hospital is, the circumstances under which he discharged himself, the kind of ailment he was being treated for, the duration for which he had been under admission at the hospital. So if it had been for a fairly prolonged period, perhaps his driver might not have been around, because the driver would not have a sleeping place. But obviously he would have an orderly who would check in once in a while.
Or family relative.
Or relative who would check in. They don't necessarily have to be beside him, but be with him. And on what grounds did the hospital or the doctor on duty agree to discharge him? What
They
time
didn't
of day?
agree to discharge you. They said he discharged himself. And when doctor says you discharge yourself, it means against medical advice, you walked out of the hospital.
Well, yes. I don't know. At what time of day did he walk out of the hospital?
Those are the facts that the police, I think, will glean and then be able to hopefully trace and find out what is happening.
Absolutely.
The other running story, too, is about the army captain who is said to involve in the debacle about the Taraba kidnapping saga. He has been identified as Captain Tijani Balarabe. He is to face a court-martial at a military formation in Jos. Similarly, two policemen who were alleged to have colluded with Hami Subala, what do you mean, are also to be dismissed. Punch identified them as an Ibi police station crime officer and assistant superintendent of police. He was said to have made 200 calls to Wadume. The other person is also the crime officer who was at the station and deliberately tampered with the documentation at the police station. The intelligence response team were said to have reported at the police station at Ibi and registered their presence, but this officer deliberately tore it off so as to avoid the information. Meanwhile, the joint investigative panel set up by the Ministry of Defense is said to be reviewing the findings with the preparation to submitting its report. It is headed by Rear Admiral Ibikunle Olaya.
Okay, Bayo, there are two stories that Jumai and I read. One had to do with the CBN and the other with Bankers Committee. But the issues are on loans.
Yes.
The CBN is already issued an advisory against bogus loans that are being offered by persons online who are asking the so-called potential victims, as it were, no, potential victims, not so-called, please, to apply online or via email to get particular loans and so on and so forth. Wow. CBN has already responded to that. Don't get involved in such loans because, those loans are not real. But much more significant, in my opinion, is a story, that's the lead story for Daily Times, that says loan defaulters to forfeit deposits in other banks. And this is coming from the Bankers Committee. Now, they might, once the policy takes off, they said now that a bank customer, that's to say a borrower of funds, will be required to sign a clause in the borrowing agreement, and the clause will state as follows. funds in accounts with other financial institutions be used to service loans when default occurs?
It's simple. First, let's take the one by Central Bank. Those defaulters were actually claiming that what they were demanding is from Central Bank. So Central Bank has dismissed that and has warned Nigerians about the fraudulent nature of what it is. The second one is that it's a simple strategy. People take loans, but because they have multiple accounts, when they default, they make sure that all their resources does not go to the bank where they have loan.
Yeah.
But with the advent of the BVN, it means that all your accounts will be available and would be known. And therefore, if you are found to have, if you attempt to deliberately avoid the bank where you have defaulted, but funds are going to other banks, then the bankers committee now agree that due to that default, those funds can be mopped to satisfy that. So it is a smart way of getting across to defaulters who don't meet the exigencies of their loan. You recall AMCON is strapped by just 20 individuals who are owing that agency some huge sums of money.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, we also recall what happened in the 90s, in the mid-90s, with the phenomenon of the failed banks.
Yeah.
Yes. There was failed bank phenomenon that, of course, led to the setting up of a tribunal and the conviction of a number of bankers and banking directors. My concern with this proposed policy in dealing with loan defaulters, what you described, Bayo, is real. I mean, you find borrowers, some kinds of borrowers, who will go to a financial institution, borrow money, and then refuse to repay, which is part of what AMCON is dealing with today. In the meantime, they have other financial resources which they will be using and living large and living big, as it were. But does that solve the problem?
No.
Okay. Now, suppose a bank on its own fails to utilize the rule of due diligence, and you just loans out money, and you hope and expect that your other colleagues in the banking sector will make their resources available to you to be able to recoup what the borrower had taken from you. I mean, the deposits that customers have with banks are funds for those banks themselves to use for trading.
Yes.
So,
in fact, another development, the central bank itself has now issued directives regarding such frivolous loans, and there's going to be strict monitoring about such loans to check the abuses.
All right, Bayo, let's, if you don't have it, that's we'll take our editorial this morning. It's coming from Daily Independent newspaper. At page 16, the $9 billion penalty for a devious contract.
Well, it is the contract that is known as the Process and Industrial Development, which for good intention and purposes was meant for two purposes. One, they were supposed to have established a gas processing plant in Calabar, and secondly, a contract to establish a gas pipeline to Europe, where P&D will be processing Nigerian gas for export for sale in Europe. And it was a deal that was going to be a win-win for that agency and Nigeria. However, it was signed around 2010, and soon after, the late president and the minister superintending over petroleum, both of who are now dead, the president took ill and a lot of challenges ensued. But the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of the Federation says that the arbitration by the three parties that led to the presentation of a British court, which has now endorsed the arbitration, is a subject that can be appealed, and there's hope. However, the Attorney General of the Federation has reiterated, if persons are found to be complicit in that deal, they certainly will face the wrath of the law. It was well-intended purposes, but you never can tell. That agency, too, has been described as a portfolio company, which for over some decades have been having some relations with Nigerian companies in the ambit of petroleum and gas. So let's see how it goes out. The Attorney General of the Federation has his hands on it, and he has assured. In fact, the Minister for Finance also indicated that the Attorney General has indicated that Nigeria will appeal the issue.
Okay, Bayo Atebe, thanks for being around. See you tomorrow. God willing. All right, it's Good Morning Nigeria, still on the network service of the NTA. We're taking a short break now. When we return, we'll get ahead with our item for conversation this morning.
They are there at the crack of dawn. They are there busy preparing while we rise for our day. They are there silently, guarding, waiting, listening, and watching. They are there ready in the sky above and the waters below, in the blistering heat of the day, in the dead of night, willing, indefatigable, determined in the defense of the sovereignty of our country. They are our first line of defense and our last. They who have paid the ultimate price in defending us. They are fathers and uncles. They are mothers and sisters and girlfriends and boyfriends. They are brothers and cousins and best friends and neighbors. They are classmates, colleagues, and citizens of this nation. They are our defenders and deserve our respect, our prayers, our thoughts. Nigeria, please support our armed forces.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Please, did you hear that?
Of course I did. That is village headmaster tune.
Eh? So, Auntie Amebo was not gossiping then?
Village headmaster is celebrating 50 years.
50? Already? This is not a joke.
It is a national celebration. NTA and village headmaster family are commemorating 50 years.
Hey, please, tell me, when is our golden jubilee?
It is from the 8th to 11th of October, 2019.
I have to go and get ready. It's time to party.
Women. But we, men, will be there too.
Please.
And to kickstart our conversation this morning, correspondent Abdul Malik Adil put together this report to serve as a backgrounder for our conversation.
Over the years, each tier of government, whether federal, state, and local government, wants to have a sizable share of the national cake. In the current revenue allocation formula, the federal government gets 52.68%, the state 26.72%, and local government 20.60%, while 13% of oil and gas revenue collected by the federal government is returned to the oil-producing state as derivation revenue to compensate for ecological disasters arising from oil exploration and production activities. Revenue sharing formula in Nigeria has always generated heated debate, sometimes along regional lines. There are those who argue that northern states are lagging behind in development because they are not entitled to the additional 13% derivation revenue enjoyed by oil-producing states. Others have championed the course of resource control by advocating that states should entirely own revenue derived from what they produce. Still, some others propose a new revenue-sharing formula altogether that would allocate more revenue to the state to make them viable as the government closest to the people. The debate is unending, but economic experts are quick to point out that any further adjustment of the revenue-sharing formula should be geared towards meeting the nation's economic needs rather than gratifying geopolitical and ethnocentric considerations. With the recent inauguration of 12 standing committees to look into the review of the present revenue-sharing formula of the Federation, as well as ways to expand the revenue base of the nation, hope is rekindled for a generally acceptable revenue-sharing formula that would engender sustainable growth and economic development. Good Morning Nigeria will focus on the revenue-sharing formula and its impact on the three tiers of government.
All right, thank you very much, Abdul Malik Adio, for that background. We have three guests with us in the studios. In the meantime, to begin discussing this subject matter, first let's welcome Engineer Elias Mbam, who is the Chairman, the Revenue Mobilization Allocation and Fiscal Commission. Engineer Mbam, pleasure to have you with us on Good Morning
Nigeria today. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Also, here with us in the studios, we have the Chairman of the Kuje Area Council, here in the Federal Capital Territory is Honorable Abdullahi Suleiman Sabo. Suleiman Sabo, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
It's my pleasure.
All right, Jumain.
And we also have in the studio Ahmed Sajo, member 2019 Presidential Inaugural Committee and former Commissioner of Information, Adamawa State. You're welcome to Good Morning
Thank you.
Nigeria. It's a pleasure to have you.
All right, gentlemen, once again, I'd like to have you with us in the studios this morning. Let's begin with the chair of the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission. Sometimes, if certainly not most times, when the subject matter of revenue allocation formula crops up, we just look at the percentages, 52 point something for the federal, and the states, they have their various allocations. States and local governments have their various allocations. But why, from your perspective, are those percentages somewhat so contentious? And what goes in arriving at those percentages of allocation to the tiers of government?
Thank you very much. First, I would like to correct those percentages. The federal government doesn't get 52.2%. In 2002, there was a Supreme Court judgment which said that the only beneficiaries of the federation account was the federal, state, and local government. And as such, what we call special fund was not supposed to benefit. So because of that inconsistency between the Act and the Constitution, the then president issued a modification order which came into effect in 2004, which added the special fund to that of the federal government. So the federal government is holding it in trust. And this special fund includes ecological fund, which is 1%, stabilization fund, which is 0.5%, development of natural resources, which is 1.68%. So eventually, the federal government actually has 48.5% of the allocation. But why is it contentious? Two major...
Just before we get into the contentious area, I would like you again to clarify this. The Ecological Stabilization and Development of Natural Resources Funds, these are funds being held now by the federal government in trust for whom?
For the federation, for the 3 tiers of government. And that is why it's not part of the constituted revenue of the federal government.
So, on what basis then did you say, sorry, again, we need to clarify this because that's where the percentages are contentious. How then did you arrive at federal government being a beneficiary now of 48.5%? Is it also on account of the receipts that the federal government gets from the Ecological Stabilization and Development of Natural Resources?
No, I deducted the 52 you had. Deduct all this special fund. And remember the FCT. The federal government still collect 1% on behalf of FCT, which is remitted to FCT after collection.
Yes.
Then if you remove 52 minus 4.5, you get about 48 point. So that's how it arrived. But how they got to 48 was when the last review was done, which was 1992. So the yardstick they used, we don't know. But that was what was arrived at in 1992. So, and that has been in operation up to today. And you can see why everybody is concerned about the review, because it's so long. And so many of the principles in operation has changed. So that's why the state, the local government, even most people feel that that formula is no more obtainable, it's no more right, it's no more just now.
Okay, over the years, successful governments have, tried to reverse the revenue sharing formula. There has been no acceptable formula so far. So how do you think this particular review of the formula will work out for the betterment of Nigerians?
Well, I believe Nigerians are now more determined, and we have matured more politically. And also, you can see more people are concerned. The Governors Forum issued some formula, and so are so many other press and other things. So we are more concerned, and I believe we are more committed to it. And we study why it failed and make sure that this time there will be more political will to conclude it.
Why are those percentages contentious? I asked that question earlier.
Why it is contentious is that everybody feels that he is supposed to get more. And you know, there are two major things people struggle for: power and control of resources. So each group wants to control the resources. And so no matter what you are getting now, you feel you are not getting the proper distance. But the formula is not about what you get, it's about responsibility. If you have higher responsibility, you are supposed to get more to be able to address those responsibilities.
Explain.
What I mean by that is this. If you look at the powers and responsibilities of the tiers of government, defense is federal government. External affairs is federal government. There are some exclusive concurrent functions of both of the three tiers of government. And each of them has a cost attached to it. You need resources to fund those responsibilities. And we expect that if your responsibility requires more fund, you should get a higher percentage. So it's not a question of you wishing. It's a question of the process determining what is due and fair and equitable to you.
All right, Chairman, Revenue Mobilization Allocation and Fiscal Commission, that's RMFAC or something that... RMFAC, yes, that's what sometimes is mistaken for FAC. It's FAC where they decide how to split the dough, at the end of every month. And we'll come back to you in the course of the conversation. Well, let's bring in now the chairman of the Kuje Area Council here in the Federal Capital Territory, Honorable Abdullahi Sabo. Abdullahi Sabo, from the perspective of an operative at the local government level, what does the existing revenue allocation formula do to you?
Thank you very much. From inception, I want to say that it has not been fair to the local government from inception trying to compute the percentage of how the distribution of revenue has been done in the country, because local government administration as the third tier of government deal with the grassroots directly, and every form of development comes from an environment, and the government usually is the grassroots. So the competition, even from the beginning, whatever was the rationale behind it, was not being fair to the local government at the beginning, and that has hampered the development of the local government across the country. So all this while, there has been agitation that what has been coming to the coffers of the local government is certainly not enough for it to be able to carry all these responsibilities.
So, what do you want as a local government, or as a third tier of government?
As a matter of urgency, let that be the political will by this current administration to be able to review the revenue share formula, and by so doing, the local government across the country should be able to have the largest share, and let them give the local government the complete autonomy to control their resources.
You know, the local government, they say, is closest to the people. And it is expected that they will perform better if their allocation is increased. 20% to 774 local government councils in this country. Do you think if you're giving more, it will be impacted on the people in the grassroots?
20% on paper. And the actual implementation, but to be fair to the federal capital, at least the thing has been favorable to us here in Federal Capital Territory, but elsewhere, you know what exists between the local government chairman and the state governors. So the 20% revenue that has been given to the local government is not been felt even by the local government. Let more of even saying what is going to be enough. So the percentage is even adequate in the first place. And even when it's even be available, it's not enough for us to be able to get the required development we are going to give the grassroots. So we are saying that there should be upper review for the local government across the country.
So how has the local government been able to generate revenue to sustain its developmental projects?
Glory be to God. Even that is still contentious. Where most of the local government, where constitutionally we are ensuring the responsibility of collecting certain types of revenue, the state government, the second tier of government, at times still come in and still collect those kind of revenue, like tenement rent, rent for kiosks and shops.
All right, thank you, Sabo, Chairman of Kuje Area Council. Let's bring in now Ahmad Sajo, who's a former Commissioner for Information in Adamawa State, and of course, he's had extensive public service experience. It's also very vast in some of these issues. But let's back up a bit and ask this question. Is the review of the current revenue allocation formula necessary?
Absolutely. You see, I was also a local government secretary, so I have operated at these two tiers, the local government and the state government. I think a review is necessary, but Kingsley, I think we should take away the politics, take away the sentiments, and look at it very dispassionately. There are two very, very important issues that we need to look at, and these issues. The first one is what the chairman had already raised. You are a lawyer, you understand that the Constitution has an exclusive legislative list for the federal government only. There is a concurrent legislative list where the federal government and the state governments can operate. And there's a residual list, which is exclusive again to the lower levels of governance. Now, this constitutional platform determines the operations of the different tiers of government. And I think that if we're talking about reviewing the revenue allocation formula, somehow, it must go pari passu with devolution of some of these powers. Some of the things that are in the exclusive legislative list are too bogus. We could devolve a lot of other things to the lower levels, which are very closer to the people, so that we can, because the whole essence of revenue allocation is to stimulate economic development, economic growth, and ensure a better life for the people. Anything outside that, we're playing politics with it. So that's number one. Number two, which is what we must credit President Muhammadu Buhari for, is that these monies we're talking about, let it go to Chairman Kuje, let it go to Governor this, Governor B. Is it going to individuals or is going to state operations? And that is why we must also, to a very large extent, strengthen the financial intelligence unit, which the president had made autonomous now. We must strengthen the autonomy of the different tiers of government, as well as the autonomy of the different branches of government. Because, how can you, for example, ensure checks and balances in a system where the head of one branch of government goes to the head of another branch to ask for money? So the president of the federation is on the right track, ensuring that the legislature at all levels are independent and autonomous. The local governments at all levels are independent and autonomous as far as their resources are concerned. So if we are reviewing this revenue allocation formula, which is very, like he said, since 1992, I mean, we should have been reviewing these things, every maybe 10 years, because the dynamics would have changed within a span of period, and the dynamic have changed now in the country. We need to review. But if you are reviewing, you must review also certain operational realities. Review also certain issues that will ensure transparency, accountability, and that these resources are actually utilized for the purpose of economic development and ensuring a better standard of living for our people. I think that is the bottom line. That is the end game. The end game is the people and not the operators of the system. So, and if the end game is the people, when you devolve a lot more resources to any level of government, you must devolve more responsibilities to that level, and you must monitor, check, and ensure that those responsibilities are carried out in a manner that serves the greater interests of the greater majority of the people of this country. I think that is at the core of it.
Well, I think, again, for the interest of our viewers, the argument might arise as to, look, the existing revenue formula was knocked out in 1992. That was under the military.
Yeah.
And we had a new constitution in 1999. But at the time the military was knocking out that revenue formula, as you know, there was a lot of arbitrariness at that time. It wasn't a matter subject for public debate or public consultation in the first instance. There were just figures that were allocated. Federal got this, state got this, local governments also got whatever they got, plus the stabilization funds that were utilized at that material time. But recourse was not hard, as it were, to the legislative lists to say responsibility of the federal government, responsibility of states, and responsibility of local governments. Now that we have the opportunity, as it were, 20 years into the Fourth Republic, is it going to be another tedious process of, say, look, unless you tinker, for instance, with the exclusive legislative list, then you might not be able to arrive at a fair figure for distribution to the 3 tiers of government?
No. I think that is not it. But let us also accept that it's been a failure of the democratic process to have left the revenue allocation formula for 20 years without addressing it, having inherited it from the military. I think it should have been, in fact, the very first thing that the leadership that took over from the military should have addressed. But we will not wait until we devolve powers to certain levels as far as the constitutional amendment process is concerned. But we can, agree that this revenue allocation formula that is presently in operation had outlived its usefulness as far as the time span is concerned, and that we need to look at it more dispassionately, talk to it very, very quickly, using the democratic structures we have. The National Assembly has senators that represent all the states on equal basis. The House of Representatives has representatives that represent the states on population basis. So there's a fair ground for us to sit down and carry out the conversation, arrive at a certain reasonable formula and implement it. And of course, the agency, the Revenue Mobilization Agency must have also collected a lot of data, because I'm sure part of their mandate is to collect data on issues of this nature. We need to begin, you know my position always, is that we need to begin to run this country as a knowledge-driven country. We need to begin to run this country as a country that, relies on data collected from the field. But all of this can take a very, reasonable time that is not too lengthy for us to arrive at a formula that will empower the people. The end game, I keep insisting, is that we must be able to, in allocating resources, stimulate economic development for this country and also ensure a better life for our people. If we don't do that, whatever we're discussing, we're just discussing it, for purposes of playing politics. The real issues are economic development. The real issues are better life for people. The president of the country had already set an agenda for all of us. We must pull people out of poverty. We must pull people out of poverty. And how do you pull people out of poverty? Is to allocate resources correctly to areas where people can be pulled out of poverty. And I agree with my brother here from the local government. The local governments have a greater role to actually intervene in areas that have direct bearing with the difficulties people face in this country. And so if we can allocate sufficient resources, ensure autonomy, make sure the money reaches the local governments, monitor the utilization of this money, and ensure that we have targets, we have goals, and that people should be able to have better life, We should increase our intervention in primary health care. We must increase our intervention in basic education. We must increase our intervention in wash issues, that is water, sanitation, and hygiene. We must increase our intervention in productive ventures like agriculture, animal husbandry. We must begin to intervene in real sectors of economy and social sectors that improve the overall living standard of our people, so that we would be able to overcome some of our crises. Most of our crises we are facing actually is directly related to poverty, deprivation, social exclusion of a large population of our country. And I think we cannot continue to survive on borrowed time, so to say. So we must address some of these issues. And I think the revenue allocation formula is at the heart of it.
Thank you so much, Ahmed Sajo. You've been within the system for a very long time, and your input is very, very relevant to the topic. But I would like to introduce our guest that just came in, Honorable Jarigbe Agwam Jarigbe, Member, House of Representatives. It's a pleasure to have you join us.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to contributions from the guests since you came in, and would like your opening comment on the mobile, the revenue sharing formula and how it can reflect on your people back home. As a member representing your own constituency, and the House of Representatives is like a longer hand of the local government, because you are representing the people at the grassroots. So what's your opening statement on this, and how can this revenue sharing formula be accepted by Nigerians, and how can it work?
Thank you very much. As a member of parliament, I will speak from the perspective of a parliamentarian. First of all, the revenue sharing formula, as it is now, is not backed up by any form of legislation. It was a unilateral decision by the executive at the time. And we don't think that's right, because you must take governance to those who need government the most. And it impacts on our people. So we think that the revenue sharing formula should be reviewed, and it should follow proper legislation. From the Commission, the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission, the proposal is supposed to be sent to the executive, and the executive will send to the legislative arm for proper legislative work. But that has not been done. And so what is existing could be said to be ultra-vires. And we cannot continue existing like that. So, and then when you look at it from the perspective of our people back home, it is said that it's the man that wears the shoes that knows where it pinches. As it were, you will not understand the problems of our people if you don't allow those who are directly involved to do the distribution of our resources in terms of equitable distribution of health facilities, schools, and other social amenities. It is preposterous to feel that if you allocate more money to the states, that the money will not be used properly because of maladministration. We cannot absolve ourselves, even at the federal level or any level, any tier of government, of maladministration. This thing is the worst cankerworm in our society today. But you don't personalize it. If you personalize it, the larger community will suffer. Our people will suffer from it. So you cannot say that we don't have governors who are doing well in this country. Our governors who have come up with so many things, infrastructure, social amenities, that are better than what the federal government is actually doing. Some people, in my local government, I don't have any federal presence apart from the few constituency projects that are there. So you can see that the states and the local governments need to be empowered. And so we should review the revenue sharing formula.
Sorry, I need to correct here. If I heard him correctly, I think he said the present revenue allocation formula is not backed by law. That is not correct. Not correct because in 1992, the military were in power, and they had a decree, which was later on transformed into an act. The modification that happened was in 2002 because the act was inconsistent with the Constitution. And the provision in the 315 in the Constitution empowers the president to modify the act to be in conformity with the Constitution. And I stated earlier here that because the special fund was benefiting directly from the Federation account, there was a Supreme Court judgment which said that was wrong. And as such, the then president modified it to be part of, it was modified and it became part of the federal allocation to hold it in trust for the 3 tiers of government. So it is derived from law. What we are saying is that that law, the principles in operation has changed since 1992. There have been more local government created, more states created. Some of the issues that we are concerned with now, we are not there. The security in the Northeast and many parts of this country, we have erosion, we have desertation, the desert approaching the encroachment. So many other things that require resources. And we are saying it is time to look at it again, but not because it is not a product of the law.
Chairman, Revenue Mobilization Commission, well, your point is noted. And perhaps we can also just add this, that at the time when the new formula was enacted by the military in 1992, we had 30 states of the Federation following the last creation exercise in 1991. By 1996, 6 additional states were created and more local governments were also created. But the pertinent question is, and Ahmad Sajo raised that, why in 2 decades of the Fourth Republic, we appear not to have taken on the issue of a new formula, considering the new and still emerging realities of a republic?
Well, it is a question how Nigerians should be prepared to answer. Because there have been several attempts. I was part of one attempt. And so the political will, the people, there's a lot of suspicion. And there's a lot of people who are more subjective. Everybody wants to win. So no matter how fair you are, people find fault. So we need to have a political will. And that's what I'm praying, that this time around, Nigerians should be ready to support the process. It should be ready, and those in the political class should have a political will to allow it to go through. And when people say, give me more or less, it is not the issue of giving me more or less. Even though we also include subjective approaches. For instance, we want to be given more. There's no basis. But the major, we I'm talking about, he is talking, for instance. I'm saying,
why is there no basis?
I'm coming now, I'm coming. Just give me 1 minute. We allow that, and that is why we invite memoranda, and that's why we hold public hearing, and that's why we collect data. But the major part of the work is how much is required to service a particular responsibility. Because the major thing is to tie the responsibility with the resources. So more of the areas we require collection of data. How much have we spent in education by the state for about 10 years? What is the average? What's the average that have been spent by in foreign affairs? When you get all of them together, you will be able to know what will be fair within the available resources. The percentage to be given to those that are performing that responsibility. And the review does not mean we are going to tamper with the functions of political allocation, devolution or not devolution. That is not our concern. That is not our mandate. Our mandate is within the fiscal arrangement present, what is fair to each tier of government. We are not concerned about, do we devolve power? We can advise, but
No,
that is not. That is not what the revenue allocation formula will deal with.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just, when I said no, I mean it's not a jump into the conversation, because I would like Ahmad Sajo to also respond to this. Yeah. Because you made a comment earlier, and the chairman has re-emphasized that in their allocative function, as it were, they take a look at your duties. Responsibilities, as indicated in the schedule to the Constitution, which is to say legislative list. But you're saying that, look, to revise the formula, you don't have to look at the list. How would you?
No, I'm not saying we don't have to look at the list. Yes. What I'm saying is that we shouldn't encumber the process by insisting that we must review the Constitution. But what he is saying is that we must look at the functions and the roles. I agree. But we cannot, again, where I disagree with a lot of the process of governance in this country is that we're not looking at it. Let us look at 10 years, what has been spent on education, and then see whether we can, on average. I don't want us to look at it that way. If we look at it that way, then we must also look at what is the impact. What is the impact? So we must begin to look at it from the basics, from the situation on ground in our communities. The president, made it very clear during his inaugural address that we need to lift like 100 million people out of poverty. That presupposes that we have a huge burden of poverty down there. Now, how do we pull these people out of poverty? If for the past 10 years, we've been allocating resources to certain functions at different levels, and yet we have not been able to mitigate poverty to the level that we are in, then something is fundamentally wrong. So we must begin to look at it from that perspective. What does it take to pull an average Nigerian out of his situation now to achieve a better life?
And then who does that? Who does the pulling? That's the issue as well. That's the
who does the
yes.
pulling?
Yes.
Is the people, the different tiers and the different levels of governance that we are allocating these resources to. He is talking about constituency project, for example. If in the legislative budget you make provision for constituency projects so as to intervene in constituencies and uplift the people, then the money is allocated for that purpose, and that money, we must have a system that we monitor. They do oversight on the executives. Who does oversight on them? We must begin to do oversight on ourselves to say, look, we are doing this for this purpose. He is telling you that in his constituency, there is no federal process. Why would it be like that? If that be the case, then what happens to all the funds that we've been allocating for different purposes at the federal level that is supposed to reach every nook and cranny of this country? Well, we must begin to interrogate the entire process so that when money is allocated, that money is translated into a better life for the people. But let me also answer one. Let me make one thing very clear, that my understanding of the body language of the current president and the president and the presidency, the leadership of the country at the federal level, is that there is sufficient political will to implement a new revenue formula if it's arrived at through the due process. And the due process has started, because there would have been no conversation around a new revenue formula if the atmosphere was not created ab initio for us to start discussing and for him to start working. Like he said, they have already started gathering data and things. And I'm sure that is at the prodding of the entire leadership, because there's a political will. And he is talking about they in the legislature, they are prepared to legislate. The local governments are prepared to make a joint submission. The state, the Governors Forum had already made its own submission. So there's already a political will to begin the process. And I think we should quickly, conclude the process so that we don't...
why the haste? Quickly. Why the haste?
Quickly, because if we don't, it will be mired in a lot of politics, and in 2 years' time, I'm telling you, they will be talking about re-election. And when the process of re-election begins to enter the fray, politics, there will be more politics played into it than what it's supposed to be. This is a post-election period. This period, everybody is sober. We have already gone through the electoral process. We're looking at governance, and this is the best period to dispassionately look at this issue that is politically contentious.
If I might come in, you've talked about elections.
Yeah.
And most of these local government councils across the country are not elected. They are appointed by government. And you're talking about, monies released to them. And how can they get that money if they are not elected, first of all? And if the state government controls the money, because some experts are saying that there should be a legislature that is strong and solid, that gives power to the local government, that will ensure that most of these local government chairmen are elected and they can be accountable.
Yeah, that is for my brother here and his and the legislature.
Yes, and my question is to you: should there be a legislature, in the constitution that says that all local government chairmen must be elected?
That's what the constitution says.
So that because you say that in your place the presence there is not much except constituency projects. So if the local government is not working and this money is accrued to the state, what happens?
Anyway, you know that there's provision for the third tier of government.
Yes.
And there's also provision for how they emerge. And that's the right thing to do. We are not talking about things...
Through election.
We are not... Through election.
Good.
We are not talking of the make-do that is going on at the moment. So we are talking of what the provision of the Constitution gives to us. So there should be elected local government chairmen in place who will carry out the implementation of whatever projects and all of that. It's a third tier of government, and so they have their functions. But I want to, for the purposes of clarity, to talk about the issue of constituency projects. As he mentioned, he asked the question, who oversights us? The implementation of the constituency projects is not carried out by the members of the National Assembly. We only make proposals looking at what our people need, carry out a needs assessment, and then what is of utmost necessity to our people. We come up with that. And all the process of procurement and awards and all of that, we only do oversight of all projects, including the constituency projects. Okay. And for the purposes of clarity, when you talk of modification of an act, we call it an amendment to the act. If you say the executive did modification, as the chairman of the Revenue Mobilization Allocation and Fiscal Commission has said here, any modification, any amendment to the act without backed up by a legislative framework, it's wrong. Very, very wrong.
Okay, what we will do, Honorable Jaribo, so that we don't get into areas that are a bit too technical and might not be particularly helpful in the context of our current conversation. I'm sure that if you referred to the Supreme Court decision to which the chairman earlier made reference to, you would know the circumstances under which, because what was in consideration was the proper application of Section 315 of the Constitution, which entitles the executive branch to bring a piece of legislation to be in line with the Constitution, assuming there are inconsistencies. And once that is done and it is gazetted, it's deemed to be subsidiary legislation, and that suffices. But let's return to the question of the proposed review of the revenue allocation formula. What are or would be the sentiments of the National Assembly with regard to a proposal that may emerge from the Commission?
Well, I think that we are representatives of the people. There is a criteria for this revenue sharing. You look at the minimum responsibility of government. You look at population. Minimum responsibility of government takes 40%. Population factor takes 40%. Social development factor takes 15%. And internal revenue effort takes 5%. That is supposed to be the distribution. So we will look at it along these lines.
See, what you just said now, Honorable Jarigbe, this refers to allocation formula within a tier of government.
Yes.
What is at issue first, before we get into within, because that's where the landmass, population, social development, to which Ahmad Sado just mentioned very passionately, that look, how do you lift 100 billion people out of poverty? That relates to social development in a sense. We are saying now, amongst the three tiers of government, federal, state, and local governments, what will be the sentiments of what might be the sentiments of the National Assembly in tinkering with the existing figures or the figures that the Commission might bring to you, bearing in mind also that, look, in terms of the assignments, the legislative lists are there. Would you say, all right, fine, we'll first tinker with the legislative list before we then come down to say, okay, what are the assignments and functions that you have? Obviously, there are some items that are a must, if you like, under a federal arrangements for the exclusive legislative lists.
Anyway, our sentiments will be in line with the realities on ground. Yeah. When you give so much, you expect so much. When you give little, you expect little. The items on the exclusive legislative list are there, and the items on the concurrent list are there. So if you have to allocate more to the concurrent list, then you have to take some responsibility of the exclusive legislative list to the concurrent list, just to decentralize governance and take governance closer to the people. That's what we'll be looking at.
Okay, thank you. Honorable Abdullahi Sabo, well, we'll still return to what the sentiments might be, because obviously the process is open. The chairman has indicated here that memoranda are being invited from stakeholders, which will include the local governments. But on this issue of constitutional responsibilities and functions, for local governments, you have all of that spelled out in the fourth schedule to the Constitution. But there should be this point, when we are looking at existing realities and existing dynamics of the country, there has been a campaign, for instance, for the establishment of state police. And when you look at it, the Constitution, of course, doesn't permit of that in the meantime. So if you are allocating revenue on the basis of maintenance of law and order, you will say, okay, this is the responsibility of the federal government. It goes to federal government. And yet, there is a campaign for the establishment of state police. But there has also been agitation for the decentralization of the correctional services, as we now know it, not the prisons. So what, in your opinion, from a local government perspective, I know that you already have yours in the fourth schedule to the Constitution, even though most of your colleagues in the states are emasculated by state governments. What would be your sentiments in terms of what you would like to see in a revised formula?
Thank you very much. The most important thing this morning is that we all agree that the template for the revenue sharing formula in the country is obsolete, that the need for us to review it is non-paramount. We're all convinced. My prayer, first and foremost, is that when the revenue mobilization center puts its indices and data together, what they said in the studio today is what's going to play, that all the memorandum that is expected from everybody will be made open so that everybody can make its submission. And at the cost of collecting the memorandum, the process has to be open so that inputs can be made substantially for we to be able to achieve what we want to achieve. For your question, we are not agitating for this as a local government because we know that we are going to be chairman forever. But we are saying that the system must work. For everybody, for everything that has beginning, it must have an end. But when there are laws that are strengthened and there is political will, the country tend to benefit from it. So state police or no state police, correctional facilities or not, as long as we have strengthened law and we are able to delegate responsibility, I know where those responsibilities belongs to without any bias, the country will be good for it. So what we are trying to say at the moment is that, including those ones that we've mentioned, and the one that we have at the local government level, where we're supposed to take what to who, or to what arm of government or tier of government, that should be done. When that is done, then the process continues. And like you earlier said, whenever it's due for us to be able to review certain things for the benefit of the country or for the benefit of the society, that should be done at the time it ought to be done. If not, it constitutes a problem. So, state police for now, in my own opinion, Nigeria, even though with the high level of insecurity in the country, because of the political situation, because of the process of amending the constitution, we won't say it has come to stay. Agitation will continue, and wherever we're able to have a rallying point, we don't know when and how it's right. But as it is today, we only have one police in this country, and this will be properly funded. The correctional facilities, as they call themselves, we only have a centralized correctional facility for now. They are inadequately funded. They should be funded correctly. Then whenever we are able to deal with the constitutional problem, they will now know what now goes to who. Thank you very much.
You know, Ahmed just talked about willpower.
Yeah. I think that is the most important, the political will on the part of the political leadership to actually divorce political sentiments from issues of national development. This revenue formula is definitely, like my brother said here, is definitely, obsolete. It needs to be reviewed. It needs to be looked at. Like the chairman said, they're already working on it. They've collected memorandum. My brother here from the legislature said they have...
They've collected or they are collecting.
Are you collecting or they are collected? They are still collecting.
They're still collecting. And I invite you to submit.
Then my brother, my brother from the legislature...
We have not made it public. We have not... we will still advertise. Okay. And we hold public hearings.
Thank you.
And I will remind you.
Okay, sir. Now, my brother said the legislature is ready and willing to work on it. And I'm very encouraged by the fact that he was talking about empirical, requirements in determining what they are going to discuss at the legislature. That is also another... the most important thing is that while we are talking about these things, we must look at the interests of the country as uppermost, the interests of the ordinary man in the street as uppermost, and we should divorce our own political sentiments in the process so that we can give Nigeria a revenue formula that will endure for some time. But I also want the legislature, in doing a new law, to determine, to make it a legal matter for the revenue allocation thing to be reviewed after a period of time. Things have changed. Look, we have, I've been a labor leader, and I still pride myself as a labor leader. We have a law that says the minimum wage should be reviewed after a certain period of time. But we forget about it until agitations force people to review the minimum wage. Now we have a new minimum wage. A lot of states, unless more money is devolved to them, will not be able to meet up with the minimum wage. So this is a new reality that we have to address. So if we are reviewing certain operational activities of governance at a certain point in time, I think the resources that should be allocated for those purposes must also be reviewed from time to time. But let me also put it this way. This federal collectible revenue, where are we collecting it from? What are we doing to stimulate the economy so that the productive sectors of the economy will give more into the federally collectible revenue? Today, our major sources of revenue, one, sale of oil, crude oil. Crude oil is nature's gift to us. You take it, you don't even add any value to it, you send it out. Why, that is not very, very productive as far as I'm concerned. The second one is custom duty. Custom duty, that one is import. Import is not good for us. We should be exporting, not importing. The excise part, where factories make money available, contributes very, very abysmally. And that does not encourage the economy to really absorb more people, and create wealth. The other one is value-added tax. Value-added tax is what? Consumption tax. It means we're just consuming. So what are we doing to stimulate economic development, to increase disposable income in the hands of ordinary people so that they can, begin to go into productive ventures, and those productive ventures will be taxed, and the tax revenue from productive activities will be the mainstay of our economy, so the entire economy will benefit. As it is now, again, we must agree that the very wealthy amongst us hardly pay the tax. The major personal tax that we pay is pay as you earn. Workers, because it's deducted from their salaries they cannot default on that one. So we must look at the whole thing. The revenue thing is an economic development thing. It's not a political thing. It's an economic development thing. So what do we do with the revenue we have? How do we use the present revenue to buoy up our economy so that the economy can itself sustain itself, so we can get a better country for ourselves?
Ahmad Sajo, thank you very much. Let's bring in again the chairman of the Revenue Commission. One of the points that has emerged from this conversation is what you indicated as an index for revenue allocation among several other indices. Namely, you look at money spent on, say, a sector or on an item over a period of time, say 5, 10 years, depending on how you decide to sort it out. But Sajo also raised the issue. Why are we looking at our input rather than the outcomes? Or might we also look at inputs and outcomes? It is sufficient for us to say that, oh, we have spent, I'll just give you an example, 100 million naira of Good Morning Nigeria in 1 month. But if the program didn't air on 5 or 6 or so times, and we also lost additional revenue, what would have happened? What is our audience survey to show what the impact of the program has been? Is it just sufficient to look at the head item? Education, you spent 100 million, or you spent 100 trillion by the federal government in 10 years, and then by the state governments, you spent so much. Are we going to also include outcomes in the evaluation?
Thank you very much. I want to say that the revenue allocation does not solve all our national problems. I can bet that if you take a statistics of allocations to states and local governments, it is not those that have the highest allocation that has performed best. So, ability of the user is another thing. So there is no way the revenue allocation formula will change the character of a leader. So that we gave him 100 million and he's not able to have a result, a positive result, does not mean that that responsibility does not require 100 million. If you give it to another person who is useful, it will bring out the right output. So we are not going to change character in the formula review. We are going to look at what do you do? What are you supposed to do rightly? And what is proper and adequate for that activity? And then say, if we now look at it as fair, just, and equitable, that is fair enough. And we pray and work on your character to be able to deliver.
That's subjective. That's not part we don't imagine that will be part of your remit to become prayer warriors for political operators.
But we cannot resolve that through the formula. You can't use formula to resolve the character of somebody. I said earlier that we will look at subjective and objective part of it. The subjective is the wishes. People bring in what they think, and we welcome every group, the local government, the state, individuals, corporate organizations, to make inputs. We even visited, in the last time we did it, the leaders, the past leaders. In fact, I toured around this country, visited almost every past president and leaders of thought, and they made inputs. Those ones are all subjective. But the objective one is the one you take data, statistical data, and you analyze the data. We also visit even other federations that have similar fiscal arrangement like Nigeria and see how their own is working. What are they doing that is different from our own? So this is not something that you do by 1 + 1 or wish you give to this, or that this person is not performing, let's add more money to him. Even if you double it, he may not perform.
All right, thank you very much. And by the way, Revenue Allocation Commission, we're not getting to that subject this morning, is also responsible for fixing the emoluments and remuneration of political office holders.
Yes. Yes, and before I answer you,
no, it's not a question.
Before I comment on
just
that,
making a comment.
Before I comment
because,
on that.
because that has also been a source of agitation in the polity. That's not our topic for today, but that's just a by the way.
Just to remind you, we also have a committee, which I have inaugurated, that is charged with the responsibility of determining remuneration appropriate for public office holders, appointed or elected. So it's not only for National Assembly or for the legislature. The executives are part of it. The judiciary are part of it. It's also a responsibility. And even the issue of pulling people out of poverty. Our main focus now is how do we diversify? Because the problem we have is that because every month there's available resource from Abuja, the states and local government go to sleep. They go to sleep. How many local governments have collected bicycle licenses? They don't. Or radio licenses. They go to sleep because at the end of the month, they rush Abuja. Now people are calling names that we must do this for us to pay 30 minimum wage. Why have you employed more than 1,000 aides? That is enough to pay the minimum wage.
You fix the salaries of those aides.
We don't.
You commission. It's political appointees.
No, not everybody.
No, not everybody, but it derives from what you have fixed.
No. They weren't backed up by law only.
No. I'm not talking about local government now, but political aides. I mean, that's...
It's backed up by law. All these people that are appointed at state level as aides, they are not part of the law does not include them.
Capture them.
No, hang on. No, how are they paid? Just a minute, Mr. Chairman. Look, commissioners, special advisors.
Those ones are captured.
That's precisely.
That's captured.
So if a governor decides to appoint, I'm giving you an example, 50 special advisors, well, it's captured. All they need to do is to get approval from the State House of Assembly. I want to appoint so many special advisors. Full stop. Don't give us a name. No confirmation hearings.
That is part of the problem I'm saying.
Yes.
That they need to be more prudent in spending. Areas of priority should not be consumption. If you appoint 50 people as SA, certainly they will eat into your capital project.
Okay, thank you so much, Engineer Mbam. We'll get back to you in due course, but we need to take a break now. When we return, our discussion on revenue sharing formula continues.
Move now! The red light won't kill you. Move now!
To the disobey traffic law, they cause accidents. Me, I don't talk, say, I no go dey do am again, because change begins with me.
I will no longer endanger my life crossing the express. Instead, I will use the bridge, because change begins with me.
Oga driver, stop this bus now, won't come down. I be one carry me past where they go.
Make I dey stop anyhow for road, they cause traffic wahala and accidents. So I go dey stop for the right bus stop, because change begins with me.
Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
If you're just joining us, this is Good Morning Nigeria, and we've been discussing the revenue sharing formula. And we have some tweets that came in, quite a lot of tweets, and we're going to take them one after the other so that our guest will respond to it. We'll begin with Mike Anyako. He says, though it's important to review the present revenue sharing formula, but let's just say the least that both states and local governments should be blamed for not generating enough internal revenues. They have not developed correct templates in this regard and attendant corruptions too.
Now, Sunday Michael Abakoji, one of our regulars, sent in this tweet. If the new minimum wage is to cut across board, then there is need for an upward review of revenue sharing formula since we are running a feeding bottle government. The questions are, how long will the states and local governments depend on the federal government? Can't they generate revenue on their own? By the way, the states and local governments don't depend on the federal government. They get their allocation just like the federal government. But of course, you can raise the issue of bailout for salaries. Now, Sunday Michael Makoji continues, talking about revenue sharing formula at this time, when the states and local governments should be moving towards self-reliance is retrogressive. It is unfortunate that we bring in politics into everything. We have no reason to kick against economic restructuring at this point.
And daily Jack Solomon tweets, serious policy attention should be attached to agriculture, reformation, industrial policy drives, mines and mineral development to diversify Nigeria's economy following the downward slide in the oscillations in oil prices to address the problem of excessive dependence on oil exportation. Thanks to the FG to have granted financial autonomy to the third tier of government in Nigeria. All what we demand now is the 3 tiers of government to be judicious in spending these allocations to bring about all-around development in Nigeria and food on the table of Nigerians.
This is coming from a Twitter handle, simply Joseph. It says the revenue, this is his proposition, the revenue sharing formula should be federal government 45%, state governments 23%, and local governments 32%. I take that again from Joseph. Says federal government 45%, state governments 23%, and local governments 32%. I hope we're not going to have, we're not going to create new empires where you now have 774 emperors in the country with 32%. But Joseph also continues, the local governments are nearer the citizens than others and can easily be controlled by the citizens.
And Adekunle tweets, there is nothing bad in it, but our government failed to remember those that are in rural areas in this country, and some people were neglected because they are living in abject poverty, while some are unable to get their daily needs because of the situation. He also says, which is quite funny, masses are not just using these funds to marry beautiful wives, buy exotic cars, send their children abroad for schooling, or buy palatial properties overseas. This they must not fail to do because Nigerians are getting wiser day by day and yearning for good governance.
Now, Onoye Victor tweets, now there's nothing wrong with Nigeria's revenue sharing formula. The only thing that is wrong is the way it is utilized. And some governors are to blame for their corrupt ways in the way they handle the funds, particularly those of local governments.
And Badamasi H. Adamu tweets, I don't think there is anything wrong with the sharing formula and its impact on the 3 tiers of government in Nigeria. It is only applicable to the status quo and development of the cities, neglecting the settler towns and downtrodden masses. Local government funds ended up in governors' private pockets. It is absolutely local government funds, not useful to the people at the grassroots.
Now, Elijah Esu tweets, revenue sharing formula adopted by the federal government, it should be adopted by the National Assembly. It would be a welcome development. But would local governments be able to utilize the funds appropriately?
That's a good question. And Kabi Law tweets, the revenue sharing formula has been helping the 3 tiers of government grow and financially stable. Some state governments and local government rely on it to pay salaries without looking forward to look for other means to generate income. The impact has been good and bad.
All right. We'd like to thank you for the tweets that have come in. Yesterday on Good Morning Nigeria, we had as our principal guest the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, along with, of course, 2 of our regulars who are professors of economics. And one of the issues that emerged from that conversation yesterday with the Honorable Minister of Finance is the need for a national development plan. The ERGP, that's the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, expires in 2020. But the outcome of our conversation yesterday was have a long-term plan, 10 years, 5 years minimum, and then work towards that. That's one point. Can we have a new revenue allocation formula in the absence of a national development plan? Or what would be the interface between a national development plan and a revised revenue allocation formula? Plus, this other point, the last national population census that Nigeria had was in 2006. Of what use would be population figures that are obsolete in a new revenue allocation formula? Sergio.
I think these are very, very strong and knotty issues to address. Truly, we need a national development plan to drive the process. And like I keep saying, we need to begin to run our system, our government, our governance system. It has to be knowledge-based. And knowledge-based means that we need to have statistics that we can rely on. And we need to develop a national development plan. And that development plan must be validated across the country, not something that should be done in Abuja and then it ends in Abuja. We must find a procedure for validation, if not across the entire local governments, at least in every state, we have a validation exercise so that we know that, yes, the development plan is actually talking about Nigeria and talking about the needs of the people. We also need a new population census. We keep talking on projections. Today, they tell you that very soon we will hit the 200 million mark. But we're not sure because we do not have a census figure to work. We're working on projections that the people will give birth, at this rate, at this period of time, but we're discountenancing a lot of things. The old ways are beginning to get obsolete too amongst the people. Today, quite a number of families have begun to limit their birth rates, not because they want to limit it, but because economic realities are forcing them to limit their birth rate. But we are still working on projections that were done years ago. So we need those two. Because, like I said, we need a knowledge-driven system based on facts, figures, and statistics. But again, when we say we will wait until we're able to get those figures before we review the revenue allocation, we may actually, be quoting crisis for ourselves. We need to talk about devolving more funds to other tiers of government because we are devolving more responsibilities to them. At least even the minimum wage is an additional responsibility. And now we need to devolve more responsibilities for primary health care, for basic education, for water and sanitation, for agricultural development to the lower tiers of government where the people will actually be directly impacted. And we need to begin to develop a template whereby our development indices, the development paradigm should shift from looking at how much we are spending in a sector to how much we're impacting on the lives of the people within that sector. I tell you in agriculture, in agriculture, for example, one of the indices we used in measuring success in agriculture in my state was that for the first time, 2 years ago, for the first time, more farmers paid to go for the Hajj than cattle rearers. It has always been cattle rearers that were paying more, and farmers were paying less. And the moment more farmers were paying, we began to imagine that, yes, more money is coming into the hands of farmers because of maybe successes in agricultural development, anchor borrowers, and the rest. When we saw that dry lands in Kebbi had begun to go green with rice, and then Lagos began to partner with Kebbi to produce, rice for consumption of people, we know that that policy is impacting rightfully on the people. We could go further, and that is what I'm talking about. So, but we need these statistics, no doubt, but we cannot wait.
Will it aid and reduce rural-urban migration so that the center can do its work and people can stay home?
Oh, of course, definitely. If people realize that there are economic opportunities, what matters is economic opportunities. The urban centers provide economic opportunities. Somebody wakes up in the morning, whatever little thing he does on the streets in an urban center, he may get 10 kobo or 20 kobo. If he goes back to his village, he has to sit down under a tree and wait for food to be prepared in his father's house, even at the age of 20, 30. So this is it. If we can provide economic opportunities at the lower level of governance, people will remain there and exploit those economic opportunities.
All right, Sergio, thanks a lot. Honorable Bajarigwe, the two issues that I raised earlier, National Development Plan and the census, would you consider them relevant in a new revenue allocation formula?
Very, 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 very important. You know, I mentioned that one of the criteria for revenue sharing is population. An attempt to review the revenue sharing formula without the proper census is just trying to put something on nothing. It will be very, very speculative. I don't know how we can make projections without having this census conducted, because it's long overdue, even by the provisions of our laws. And then the National Development Plan is very, 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 very important. We can't do without it. There must be a plan, there must be KPIs, and all of that for us to move forward.
Honorable Sabo, on this same issue, National Development Plan.
Census is the most official and most acceptable form of collecting figures of population of the country. I think we have to work from as lumber. If all agencies and parastatals of the country are working the way they expect to be working, we ought to relatively have the idea of the actual population of the country as we go on. But since some of us people are not committed in discharging their duties and responsibility, we hide under one guise or the other when it comes to issues like this, and they are very, very sensitive. So what I'm trying to say in essence is that census is important. It's the most acceptable of collecting information on the population of the country. But there are other ways we can equally collect data and indices if those who are saddled with the responsibility of collecting the data are living up to their responsibility. So agencies are revenue mobilization, other agencies that generate data and information for all this planning, like you said, including the data of fiscal development of the country. With the available data they have at their disposal, they should be able to do that, because the need for the reviewing the revenue formula to see that it has direct impact on the populace is obvious. No? So in the interim, let's do that while the people who have the responsibility of organizing the census will look into that and see what we're doing. But in the meantime, the country has to move forward.
Okay, but thank you very much. Chairman, from your commission's point of view, what will be the interaction between a revised revenue formula and a national development plan, and of course the census, which we last had in 2006, which also brings us back to the point that Honorable Jaribre was making earlier with regard to intra-tier allocation, particularly, say, among states. The factor of land mass, which is sometimes contentious, population, school enrollment, and some other issues that come up from time to time.
Well, thank you very much. I think there is need to explain the revenue formula more clearly. There are two types of review. The sharing among the three tiers of government, which we call vertical allocation, between the state, federal, and local government. And there is another one, formula among states, among local governments. When they have their share, how do we allocate it to each local government, to each state? And that's where the population, land mass, equality of states come in. And I agree that population is one of the indices we consider. But what is allocated to population can always be used. We don't give that the population is this. If it changes tomorrow, the percentage will change. Okay. For instance, at present, it's 30%. So we take the population of each state and we allocate 30% of the revenue of the state to population. And then whatever you get is a proportion of their own present population. But if by tomorrow we receive from National Population Commission that your population has increased from A to B, the factor we use will now be B. but the percentage remains the same. So it has no effect.
What is the basis for allocating 30% for population in the first instance, or even land mass? Are you, I mean, sorry, Mr. Chairman, some persons might joke that on account of that percentage, you can find it out the finagling with the figures, or that you are an encourager of the population boom that we are seeing in the country, which is turning into a demographic crisis.
But you also heard people, you heard that what we are, one of the things the formula is aimed to do is to care for our people, to develop our place, to ensure even development. And one of the criteria of development is population. If we are to use population, we don't just say Adamawa, this. We have an institution, the Population Commission. We get the data from Population Commission. What is the population of Adamawa, for instance? And from there, we know how much of that 30% should go to Adamawa. And you can agree with me that human capital is very important. And we need money to develop human beings. We need schools. We need hospitals. If you don't consider population, how will you ensure that the number of children can be accommodated in the school? So it's part of areas we must consider.
National Development Plan?
Exactly.
No, National Development Plan. Very quickly, please.
Okay. National Development Plan. We cannot wait. I agree it is important. But there is no need waiting, because the plan for next 5 years will soon become we need another plan for another year. So we continue waiting. So let us use what is available now to review. As we progress, we review again.
All right. It's on that note, we'd like to express our deep appreciation to Engineer Elias Mbam, who is Chairman, Revenue Mobilization Allocation and Fiscal Commission. Mr. Chairman, thanks for being with us on Good Morning.
Thank you very much.
We also like to appreciate Honorable Jarigbe Agom. Jarigbe is a member of the House of Representatives. Thank you for being on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much.
Honorable Abdullahi Sabo, Chairman, Kuje Area Council in the FCT. Thanks for being around.
It's my pleasure.
And Akbar Sajo, former Commissioner for Information and Strategy at Adamawa State, and former Secretary to Mubi Local Government at Adamawa State. Yes. Thank you for, and the ex-Labour leader.
No, Labour leaders don't retire.
Thank you for being with us on Good Morning Nigeria. So it's on that note we end our conversation this morning, and we are going over to our sports desk now, and just to indicate, of course, that some hours ago, Serena Williams took on her favorite and famous opponent, Maria Sharapova, whom she thrashed in straight sets, 6-1, 6-1 at the US Open.
I like that, Kesley.
Nigeria's Falconets will